If you want to understand how your test works, try testing it with minimal detergent to see if you still get a pass or if you get a fail as you would expect.
What if one conversation could save a life? What if one new process or new product could save a patient from surgical harm? Broadcasting from a hospital basement near you, you are listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the global voice of sterile processing. Each week we spotlight the best practices, products and people from around the world who are disrupting our profession and helping you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Join us as we have the kinds of conversation that matter and give our industry the kind of voice that it deserves. Nyt on aika mennä puhdastakin puhtaammaksi. And now it's time to go beyond clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Greg Sautter, sales manager for Serim Research Group. And today, Hank, we are going to be talking about chemical efficacy, and we're going to break it down into sections, starting with automated cleaning. We'll move on to ultrasonic and then ultimately manual cleaning and get a little bit of a picture of what it means to be meeting best practices in these areas. And what are some things that people think about automated ultrasonic or manual cleaning that may just not be quite true?
That's right, Justin. Greg is a test guy. He lives and breathes testing chemicals and processes in sterile processing and across different areas of healthcare. So if you ever wondered anything about your test, this is the episode to tune in for how these tests relate to the chemicals that you're using every day.
All right, we're going to be right back after a short break with Greg Sautter, sales manager for Serum Research Corp. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Greg Sautter, sales manager for Serum Research Corporation, and we're going to be talking about more chemicals on this season of Beyond Clean. We're getting close to the end, Greg, but thank you so much for joining us and appreciate you coming on the show.
You are very welcome. I'm happy to join you guys today.
Greg, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your background and the work that you do?
Okay. So I am a biologist by training and have been in medical sales and marketing for 20 or some years. Started out actually as a biologist and entomologist with the federal government and did that for a while and then jumped into medical sales. And like I said, been doing medical sales for 20 years with a couple different parts of that industry. I've been with Serum Research for 6+ years. Serum makes a variety of test strips, mostly for the medical market. So we're a manufacturer making tests for a variety of purposes. We make tests for dialysis. We make tests for monitoring high-level disinfectant solutions and a couple products for sterile processing world.
Greg, I have to show off just a little bit. I did take an entomology class in college,
very good.
I know what you're talking about there.
Very good. Yeah.
But just enough to be dangerous, right?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. And it's the same way for me. Is I don't do much in that area anymore, but I still have people that say, "Hey, what's this bug? What is it?"
Right. Yeah,
every once in a while, and many of those I haven't looked at or seen for a long time. So
awesome.
It's always it's a fun world, though.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're going to have some bug nerds out there listening to the show today, so you might get some more questions after this interview.
Sure,
my brother-in-law got his degree in entomology, so
okay.
It's funny that you say
very
that.
cool. Very cool.
I haven't even talked to him enough to be dangerous.
So, on topic, I want to kind of start on the topic of cleaning verification. Obviously, the title of this episode is
Sure.
"Do My Chemicals Really Work?" And considering your background and context, for what you do every day, I've got an assumption that you've got some pretty good definitions or answers for what is cleaning verification, sterile processing. How does it compare and contrast to verifying chemical efficacy? Are those the same things? And just kind of start at the bottom level there, and then we'll build up.
Okay, sure. So when I think about cleaning verification, when you look at sterile processing, you're really looking at the process that is being used to clean the medical instruments. So, that can encompass the washer disinfectors, the ultrasonic cleaners, as well as manual cleaning. And so there's a variety of things involved. Certainly, you have some cleaning verification tests as they're called in general terms that look at a variety of factors. Obviously, looking at the equipment, you have readouts from the washers, looking at cycle times and temperatures. That's an important part of the process, as well as then looking at the end result. Are the instruments clean? So I think they all kind of encompass the cleaning verification topic, if you will, which is looking at what you're doing to clean the medical instruments. Is it working effectively to produce clean instruments at the end process? So when you look at chemical efficacy, that maybe is a little more challenging because you're looking at what the chemicals do or what the enzymatic detergents do. I think it's important when you're choosing a cleaning verification test to look at something that does address what the enzymatic detergents do. There's a lot of variation in the detergents. Each manufacturer has their own special formula. They look at things a little differently, and ultimately how the instruments look when they are done with the cleaning process, how they look when they come out of the washer disinfector, how they look when they come out of the ultrasonic cleaner. Making a visual check on those kind of tells you if the chemical efficacy is there and if the detergents are working properly. And again, looking at and incorporating other tools that can look at what the detergents are doing in the cleaning process. So choosing a verification test that will address chemical efficacy throughout that is an important part of that.
If you had to, put a percentage out here, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but in looking at the things that make chemicals not work, is it a higher percentage of we just have a lot of chemicals in the market that are not designed well? Or is it the old kind of cliche, it's almost always user error? For the most part, we've got good chemicals, but our process on the front line is either broken because of temperature, because of dilution, because of all those other kind of list of becauses. Where would you kind of rate the primary breakdown for if we got a chemical that's just not doing its job?
I don't know that I can put a percentage on that because cleaning is a complex process. There's a number of things involved. I like to refer back to the center circle, and I think, Hank, in some of your other podcasts, you've had other speakers mention that. I know certainly when I've seen articles written about sterile processing and cleaning verification, a number of the authors have looked at that. And really it has applications for multiple industries. And just a real brief introduction to that for those that might not be aware is the center circle was developed in 1950s by, I think it was Henry Center. He was with a laundry detergent company, if I remember correctly. And in his thought process, there's 4 main factors involved with the cleaning process. So obviously you have the detergent or the enzymes in our case, when we're talking about sterile processing, the cycle time, the temperature, and the mechanical action. They're really interdependent. They all work together. And if you look at some of the equipment, speaking about washers specifically, you have high impingement washers, low impingement washers. They look at cycle times differently. They may adjust those differently. They may look at detergent use differently. So all of those are interdependent, and I think it's important to look at all of those. Sometimes there's multiple factors that cause a cleaning failure, if you will. Sometimes it's just one. So it's important, I think, for sterile processing staff and professionals to look at everything every day just to make sure something's right. So that includes, looking at the washers before they're used to make sure that the spray arms aren't clogged, to make sure they're spinning properly. Those are very important things that are part of the cleaning verification, big picture type of thing, as well as in, whatever test that you use for the verification process. Does that, kind of address everything? I know when I talk to people, I kind of say it's important to test your test or verify your test. So I encourage people to look at how their verification test responds under different conditions. And I know in the real world, that's very difficult for sterile processing professionals based on the workload. But, if you want to understand how your test works, try testing it with minimal detergent to see if you still get a pass or if you get a fail as you would expect. Try doing it with short cycle times, lower temperatures, just because there's so many things that work interconnectedly, which is a bad word, but it kind of it's the way things go, is that, they're interdependent. Something that's a shortfall in one area can affect the entire process, but you don't really know until you kind of investigate something that's, you get a fail and, what was the cause of that? And you have to look at everything. So knowing how your test, whatever that is, responds under different conditions, I think is very important. So you can say, okay, if something's wrong, it will indeed show a fail, which is, that's as important as getting a pass every test. If, the idea is to prevent something from happening if something's not working right. So, you don't want to see a fail, but if you do, you want to know that your test accurately is showing that and something needs to be investigated.
Yeah, that's such a important point on just the practical side of things. I can't tell you how many departments I've been into on the consulting side, and we're looking at their cleaning verification documentation, and everything is passing like 100%, and I kind of dig into it a little bit and say, hey, have you ever had failures? And oh yeah, we've had failures, but we just don't document those failures. We test again until you pass, and we document the pass. And I'm like, well, I understand what you're doing there, but you're not seeing the value of documenting those failures because of all the trends and opportunity that you're talking about to say, hey, is it every Monday when they're doing something on the plumbing that our washers are failing, and you're not documenting, you just have no transparency.
Right, exactly.
That. So that's a fantastic point.
Yeah, well, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think knowing that there's that pass there at some point is important, but knowing that something failed and what you did to fix it so that if it's next Monday, there's a trend there. And so something is going on. So the maintenance crew has flushed the lines or something like that. And the water hardness is way off. So the detergent doesn't work as well the first time or something, something like that. There's all kinds of things like that are behind the scenes that can affect the process that are really difficult to understand. And so testing every day is important, knowing what caused the fail so that if you kind of see that again, you can address that. And because ultimately it's about having the instruments clean at the end of the process so that they can be sterilized and reused. So
the big takeaway with your test the test comment too, I think, is hopefully going to capture a lot of folks' imagination of, oh yeah, just because it, was created to do something in the laboratory, does it actually do this in the field? And if so, does it do it differently?
Right.
Those different contexts that you mentioned, like a low detergent or, a shorter time span. Like that's such a powerful thought process and process in general to go through with any test that you're using. Well, let's jump in here to a couple of different categories to kind of highlight some of the big myths and misconceptions that you've encountered in the industry, starting with automated cleaning. Like you mentioned a couple of points already here, for automated cleaning, but what are the big things that if you had the opportunity, like right now, to set the record straight, what are some confusions or debates maybe out there that you kind of want to clarify and say, yeah, you need to be looking at it or thinking about it in this way in the context of cleaning or chemical verification?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it does kind of go back to maybe testing the test or understanding how your process works. So if you get a new washer disinfector, you're going to be running it through its paces just to find out how it works. So again, looking at different cycles, looking at how that responds to different detergent concentrations. And if the verification test you've been using, how does that respond to each of those? So we run into a lot more challenges when you look at ultrasonic cleaners than washers because, the washers have a lot of pre-programmed cycles. You I know this simplifies it. You hit the button and go. You look at then the readouts. Was the cycle time what I expected? Was the temperature what I expected? So you're relying on the internal controls with the washer to help you out in that process. But if you change a different cycle to a different cycle, does that still clean as well as you expect? Or does the detergent concentration need to be adjusted for that? And does the automated equipment do that correctly or as you expect with the washer? Maybe it's one thing to really take a close look at. And maybe, if your standard is to run your verification test at 9 a.m. every morning, maybe do it some different times during the day or do it on some different cycle settings just to make sure that those cycle settings are still providing the cleaning efficacy that you want. So those might be some interesting things for people to check out. I don't know that there's any real big misconceptions in that area, but again, there's a lot of things to look at because there's so many things involved, and it is challenging for sterile processing professionals to look at all of that. And I know maybe we're going to lead into ultrasonics at some point, but we find more challenge with ultrasonics because even though they are becoming more complex and there's many that have now multiple levels, you can run different sets of tools on each level and different cycles and things like that. I think there's still a lot of people that are using ultrasonic units. There may be a little more of the manual settings. You set the time somehow and you set the temperature. We found that, a lot of people, they have challenges. They're looking at what the recommendations are from the manufacturer of the detergent. of the instruments and of the sonic machine. And so we find a lot of detergents have a very wide range in temperature use, a very wide range in concentrations. And by default, sometimes people are going on the lower end. So, okay, the detergent manufacturer says I can use this at 20 degrees, and the cycle time, according to the sonic manufacturer, is 7 minutes, and that matches the instruments, and the detergent concentration is 1/2 to 1 ounce. So I do 1 ounce per gallon at that temperature and that time. And, maybe that's not enough. And we found, with our products that with some detergents, we regularly see fails, and you really have to bump up the temperature and the cycle time to get passes. And again, it's how the instruments look when they are done with the cleaning cycle is the ultimate test. But I think in some cases that some of the parameters that we've talked about, the cycle time, the temperature, just aren't long enough. And really that is in due part, I think, to how much enzyme activity there is. And we talked, you kind of mentioned that earlier with the chemicals. So temperature has a great impact on the enzymatic activity. And generally, as you increase temperature, you see more enzymatic activity, which is why if you are sometimes on the lower end, you don't see a pass with tests because there's just not enough enzymatic activity at that temperature or that cycle time. And you need to adjust the cycle time if you're using that temperature to get the same overall cleaning efficacy. And then, as you increase temperature, enzymatic activity goes up. And then at some point, the temperature can be too high and you've killed off the enzyme. So there's an interesting curve that you look at for every type of enzyme where activity increases rather quickly with temperature. And then at least with the proteases that are involved for enzymatic detergents used in the medical world after 55 or above 55 or above 60, you see a rapid decrease in enzymatic activity. And
yeah, it's like warmer. Oh, too warm.
And then dead. So nothing. So it's really kind of maybe that's a practical example of how someone needs to look at all of those cycles affecting cleaning together and how they impact the overall results.
I'm going to throw another curveball at you, Greg. On the sterilization front, there's a lot of trend or pressure conversation around testing every load. We're already testing every load with chemical indicators and integrators. There's more of a move now to be testing every load with biological indicators. And then we turn our eyes to the cleaning process and we're like, once a day. Yeah, once a day. And if you get a failure, don't recall, just, try to fix it, test it until you get a pass. Am I the only one out there that sees kind of some inconsistency there with how we're viewing our testing of these processes and loads? Like, have you ever considered that? I guess number one, and what's your opinion on that?
Sure. I understand the guidelines from the sterilization process, and that makes a lot of sense. I think it also makes sense to test washers and ultrasonics more frequently. So if you think back over the last, 6-7 years, the AAMI guidelines recommended weekly, preferably daily testing. With the last update, it went to daily testing. And as I talk to people, I find virtually everyone is doing daily testing now. And that's probably a good start. But we do talk to some people that are using the same or approaching it the same way as they do with the sterilizer. They're testing every load every day. So I think you need to look at a variety of factors there. I think more than one time a day is probably a good idea. And I mentioned earlier, I believe that if you have a different cycle, if you're running a different cycle for a different set of instruments, it might make sense to test that too, just to make sure, not only like the first time you try that with that cycle, when it's different than the norm, but maybe do that on a regular basis too, just to make sure. I think it makes sense because things can change with the delivery system of the detergents. You don't necessarily know if your detergent jug is in the other room. You may or may not know exactly what the expiration is of that. I'm sure that's being checked on a regular basis, but things like that can affect that, especially then if you go to a different cycle time entirely. So I think it makes sense to test more often because you don't know when something stops working until you get a fail test. And so, if you test every morning, okay, and then the next morning, so this is Tuesday, you test this morning, it's fine. Tomorrow morning, it's not. Okay, when did something go wrong on Tuesday morning, afternoon? And so it really makes sense to look at that. And again, I know it's a challenging world for sterile processing professionals, and to put something in every load, it's one more thing for them to do. So they really have to balance, I think, workload. Economics are important too. Some of the verification tests are fairly expensive. So in these days with COVID and reduced income for revenue for hospitals, that could be part of the decision process too, is that'd be great to test every second load, every third load, but economics dictate something different. But I think testing once a day is very critical. And I think that's by and large what most people are doing.
So we talked a lot about insights in automated cleaning, ultrasonic cleaning. And so to kind of round out this conversation, Greg, we want to talk about manual cleaning. What are some important things to remember as it relates to manual cleaning? But then we can get into kind of those myths and misconceptions as well.
Okay, sure. Well, a couple of things, you think about manual cleaning is that, maybe you have a fewer number of parameters you look at when you're doing manual cleaning because you don't have the washers. You don't have I guess you kind of take away the mechanical action that's automated by the washers and the sonics. The mechanical action is done by humans in that case. AMI guidelines recommend temperature from 27 to 44. Again, I think it's looking at what the detergent recommends. And we've done some testing with detergents and found that lower temperatures with the lower detergent concentration may not be enough that you need. So again, 1/2 to 1 ounce per gallon, using 1/2 ounce at 27 doesn't work as well as 1/2 ounce at 44 or 1 ounce at 44. So again, looking at those parameters. So that's again something you kind of have to do. Maybe change your soak time and the amount of mechanical action, the amount of scrubbing that's done. Looking at the detergent dates, making sure that's in date. Obviously, again, looking at how the instruments look after they're done with the cleaning process. So AMI guidelines don't have any recommendations for verification testing for manual cleaning. They do or have started to add some things. I think the one thing they kind of talk about now, which makes sense to me, is making sure the automatic dosing equipment dispenses the detergent as you would expect. So whether that's a once a week thing or every day, is instead of putting 3 pumps in the sink automatically, so you put 3 pumps in some kind of container when then you can measure that you get the number of recommended ounces or the milliliters, whatever it is recommended by the detergent manufacturer.
It's so funny you say that too, because I've seen people switch detergents and then not adjust that rate, and they might not be diluting properly, but they think, it's automated and everything's the same and it's all equal, but the concentrations can vary greatly from one manufacturer to another. The other thing that sometimes happens is there's a range, and they go on the high end of the range, and you start hearing conversations on the clean side about instruments feeling oily. And so they're not getting, fully rinsed after the cleaning, and it's almost, too much concentration, even though it's still within the instructions. It's just more than is necessary. So, making those kinds of tweaks, I think, is really important as well.
Yes, exactly. I'd agree. And again, it's how the instruments look when they're clean after the cleaning process. Do they feel oily? Obviously, do they look clean? Those kinds of things. And, keep in mind, no two detergents are the same. Even from the same manufacturer, they're going to have slightly different enzyme concentrations. The lubricants might be slightly different. All detergents in the concentrated form have inhibitors in them that prevents the enzymes from basically eating themselves up. And so when they're diluted, the enzymes become more active. So, the formulations change, and the amount of inhibitors could be still too much in some cases with it being too concentrated. So all of those things are important. So looking at, things like you mentioned, how do the instruments feel after the process, and obviously how clean they are.
Another thing we just talked about on the last episode too was really focused on scope or endoscope reprocessing. And we were talking about how, with flexible scopes, the process is always baked in to just empty the sink between every single scope. But when you're in decon and there's, stainless steel instruments, we don't always see that the sink is drained between every set that comes through to be reprocessed. What are some issues around that? What is best practice there? And how would somebody know if they'd kind of reached a point where, just due to the soil that's been introduced and the work that the detergent has already done in the sink, it just can't continue to do its job because it's already taken on too much soil? Do you have any ideas around that?
From the practical standpoint, and I generally believe and agree with the AAMI guidelines that you should change the detergent in the sink after every load. But, practicality is if your load was 3 forceps or, a minimal amount, your detergent is still going to be good. So I think, you need to look at some practicality there too. So obviously looking at how cloudy the detergent is in the sink is one way to know how much bioburden or how much load is still there. Cloudiness, what's on the instruments when they come out, are you able to rinse off all the, residue? Are there is there a lot of stuff floating around in there? So I think really err on the side of caution, change it more often, especially since that's what the AAMI guidelines are. And to me, it makes sense. And, as I do talk to people, I try to throw in some practical examples. So you can, in some cases, maybe think about this as washing your dishes at home. At some point, when it's time to change the solution that you're using to wash your dishes at home. If you're doing, washing pots and pans in the manual type of thing versus the dishwasher, at some point, it's just not working well. But I think since we're talking about human health, medical instruments, changing more often is the better way to go.
Yeah, we talked a lot about critical thinking in that episode as well. And this is just one of those gray areas in sterile processing where we're challenged between best practice and can we actually execute this best practice? Do we even have enough sinks in decon based on the volume of trays that are coming through? And so what I like about your answer is that you're saying, look, best practice is between every load, but you do have to be, at some point reasonable about what you're working with. And so try to get as close to best practice as humanly possible. And as you mentioned, with a couple of small, sets, especially if there's not a lot of working elements, right? Like it's just retractor systems. There's really, not a lot of, as I like to refer to, nooks and crannies that have to get reached, by the detergent because you're not going to get a brush on some of the surfaces of the instrument. Those are all part of the factors I think that come in to that judgment call or that critical thinking. But ideally, we want to be changing out the water between every set.
Yes, exactly. Yep. That's a great way to summarize that.
So how many facilities out there do you think actually do that practice? Because I know there's going to be people listening to this going, Justin, we do between every set. No problem at our facility. What are you talking about? That is best practice and everybody should do it. And I do wholeheartedly agree with that. But just as you've gone out there and supported healthcare organizations across the country, what's the adoption rate on that?
So I guess that would be a good question for the next time I'm out visiting people, is that I really don't know. I think as I go to, various chapter meetings for the HSPA, formerly ISHM, I hear other speakers that they talk about that. So I generally feel that people are changing the enzyme solution more frequently. They're really looking at a variety of factors. And I think more people are following those guidelines than are not. So that's just kind of my gut feeling at this point. I think it'd be interesting to do a lot more surveying of people as I talk to them to find out if that's really the case. But I do believe that that's what majority of departments are doing.
All right. Well, Greg, really, really great job in this interview. Time always passes quickly. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I guess it's fun to visit with you guys again. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. It's a great topic, I think, to look at cleaning efficacy and understanding everything that's involved, looking at chemical efficacy in various ways that you can look at that and things that can be looked at or things that are important considerations from the sterile processing professional standpoint.
Great. All right, Greg, thanks so much for coming on and looking forward to talking to you again in the future.
All righty. Take care.
That was Greg Sautter, sales manager for Serim Research Group. And Hank, we're getting close to the end of this season dedicated to chemicals. And I really love how we just walked right through automated cleaning, ultrasonic cleaning, and then finally manual cleaning, talking about some best practices, some myths, misconceptions, and even really touching at the end there on the importance of the critical thinking through all of that, because practicality versus best practice can sometimes be a challenge depending on how your department is set up.
I had no idea that we'd be talking so much about chemical efficacy this season, but it has come up again and again and again. But it makes sense. if you're spending all this time choosing a chemical, implementing the chemical, you want to make sure that it works. And I really appreciated all the insight that Greg shared on doing just that. Testing the test was a big takeaway for me.
That's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. We're also available on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or you can search for Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast application. We've also got bonus content, but that's only for certain episodes, and you have to download the smartphone app for iPhone or Android. And while you're there in the marketplace, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.